Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 304, which goes down this weekend. A pay-per-view, Manchester, England. Two amazing title fights, both rematches as well, which is really interesting. So, yeah, look, the card, in my opinion, is great from top to bottom. It's got a real good vibe about it. Plenty of prospects as well, and also fighters that are fringe fighters on the fringe of becoming something great with wins here that can help propel them up the rankings. So there's a lot at stake for a lot of these fights, especially towards, the mid to top prelims and then into the main card as well. So yeah, I like this card a lot. The only thing that I don't like is the fact that we're in England and the card starts at like 11 p.m. local time, which will finish 6 a.m. local time. So anybody that's actually going to watch the event, it's gonna be a tough old drag being in that stadium starting from 11 p.m. and finishing at 6 a.m. So something different at the very least. We haven't had this since, I think it was Michael Bisping when he defended the title, the middleweight championship in Manchester for the first time. I'm pretty sure that was one of these late events as well to accommodate the pay-per-view time for the US. But yeah, look, it's something that I wish was definitely on during the day, which it should be in the UK, but it's not. Either way, I'll be staying up. I'll be watching the card 100%. From my perspective with this podcast as well, I am going to do pretty much, or as quick fire as I can, quick fire predictions throughout the entire podcast. Still not feeling 100%. I've been absolutely smacked all week since, the last podcast. Actually, last Monday when I recorded, I said that I was a little bit under the weather. Later that day, absolutely battered. And if I hadn't have recorded on Monday last week, I just wouldn't have put a podcast out. So still feeling, the sort of after effects from having a rough week. So again, I'm just going to fly through this as quickly as I possibly can, just to give something out there, just to give my predictions and a bit of analysis and breakdown for you guys that do tune in. As I say every single week, I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I'll always try my best to put something out for you guys. But just before I get into those breakdowns, as always, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. As always, we've got something for absolutely everybody, whether you're a long-term gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that wants to use a little bit of outside analysis to help with your own analysis, whether you just want to follow what the handicapper myself is betting on, where my money is, or whether you're just a pure fun gambler that just likes $10, $20, $30 on a long shot parlay in the hopes of winning a few $100 in return, then we've got everything in one subscription at MMA Play 365. And also every subscription includes Blaydes AI, which is our UFC prediction software, where you'll get a percentage prediction from every possible outcome for every possible fight on every single UFC card. So everything in one place at MMA Play 365. It's super affordable as well. It's not something you're going to have to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on, because our principle is we need you to make your money back from the subscription that you pay for, so then you can start profiting on top of that as well. So again, with that in mind, we make the prices super affordable. So make sure you check out MMAplay365.com before this UFC 304 Manchester card kicks off. Now, with the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, we start with the breakdowns, and of course we always enter in with the main event, which is for the UFC welterweight championship. We've got Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad 2. So as I mentioned in the introduction, this is a rematch. I don't think you can take much away actually from the first fight, and actually this applies to the second rematch as well in the co-main event, I suppose, but you can't really take too much away. And the reason being is the fight ended early in round 2. It was scheduled for 5 rounds. It was a main event on a fight night. But the reason you can't take too much away from it is because, like I say, it did end early in round 2 due to an eye poke on Belal Muhammad, where Belal was clearly hurt. I think it did cause, pretty serious damage to the eye. So, you can't fault Belal for not wanting to continue. However, eye poke, it was all Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards was looking like the sharper striker, the better striker, the quicker striker. He was doubling up on volume as well, strikes volume on Belal, and it was just looking like it was a little bit of a mismatch. Now, you have also got to take into consideration that this was now a number of years ago, 3-4 years ago, I believe, so, which is weird. It actually shows you how fast time flies, because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but it was. And since then, Leon Edwards has developed, improved, got on a run, beating Kamaru Usman twice, won the UFC championship, beating Colby Covington as well. Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington are two of the, trademark welterweights that have been around the top of the division for years. And on the flip side, look, Belal Muhammad's gone through a win streak himself as well, looked really good in doing so, also improved, also developed. So I don't think it's a case of one fighter's developed more than the other. I think they've both developed in their own ways. They've both developed into, world championship title kind of fighters, with that skill set, with the ability. But I just think that this fight really favours Leon Edwards for a couple of reasons. Firstly, both fighters are extremely well-rounded. They're not really like a master or a specialist in one specific aspect of MMA. They're both really good strikers, they're both really good wrestlers, really good grapplers, and also both offensively and defensively as well. But I just think Leon Edwards is slightly better in all of those areas. I think he's the slightly better striker, I think he's the slightly better wrestler, I think he's the slightly better grappler, and it's not by a long way, but it's one of those fights where when one fighter is just a little bit better in all of those areas, it tends to show inside the cage, and they tend to pull away with the rounds and make it look a little bit more comfortable than what some people might think it's going to be. The other real big aspect for Leon Edwards in this fight is, look, Belal Muhammad's got really good fight IQ, and when he fights a certain fighter with a certain style, he'll change his approach, not only from a stylistic perspective, but he'll mix between being a pressure fighter and being a counter striker, depending on who he's fighting. So what that really shows is that Belal Muhammad comes in with a good game plan, with a good strategy, and he can switch things up depending on where his opponents are strongest. So wherever his opponents are weakest, that's where Belal Muhammad will be strong himself inside the cage. The issue with Leon Edwards is Leon Edwards doesn't really have that real weakness. So, for example, when Belal Muhammad fought Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, the strategy was pressure, wrestle, grind, win the fight. When Belal Muhammad fought Sean Brady, the plan wasn't to wrestle and grapple, and he didn't attempt to wrestle and grapple. It was more sit back a little bit, defend some strikes, defend the wrestling, then come forwards once the takedowns were defended, put the pressure on, and that's exactly what he did. Same with Vicente Luque. That was a bit of a mix. That fight was, he's going to have some success wrestling, but it's probably going to be towards the back end of the rounds. So strike for the first half of the rounds, then look to hit a takedown when Vicente Luque least expects it. But like I say, where do you do that with Leon Edwards? And I think that was Belal's problem the first time around. Like, if Belal's getting, lit up a little bit or getting beat from a striking perspective, can he go to the wrestling and grappling? Well, it's going to be tough to take Edwards down. It's going to be tough to keep him down. And if Belal Muhammad tries to strike with him in the hope that Edwards wants to wrestle and grapple, well, I think Edwards is the better striker. So this is why I think it's a bit of a stylistic problem, this fight for Belal Muhammad, because I don't think he can use the type of smart IQ and game planning and strategy that he's been able to do against other fighters in the lead up to this title shot, because he's been fighting specialists. Gilbert Burns, BJJ specialist, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, striking specialist, Sean Brady, wrestling grappling specialist. So he's had opponents that have had weaknesses and holes. I don't think Leon Edwards has those big weaknesses and holes for Belal Muhammad to really exploit, and that's why I think that he's going to have a big issue with Leon Edwards in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Leon Edwards to win this fight and still the UFC welterweight champion. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we're in the heavyweight division for the interim UFC heavyweight championship. We've got Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blaydes 2. So again, another rematch. Tom Aspinall, of course, is the current interim champion for the UFC heavyweight division. No idea what's happening with John Jones. No idea when he's going to be back or if he's ever going to be back. I think that I would have liked this fight to be for the undisputed UFC heavyweight championship if John Jones comes back, that's great. He can jump straight into a title fight to win a belt that he never actually lost. There's no shame in that. It's happened in the light heavyweight division numerous times over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So, yeah, I'd have liked it to have been for the undisputed belt, but regardless, in my opinion, for right now, with the active UFC heavyweight roster, this fight will determine who is the best heavyweight in the UFC right now. Like I say, if John Jones comes back, that's a different conversation. But right now, these are the active top 2 fighters, and this is why they're in an interim championship fight. And just like I said, and I briefly did mention it in the main event breakdown as well, there's not really too much you can take away from their first fight. I was actually there live for their first fight. You could hear a pin drop after, Tom Aspinall went down with the leg injury. Curtis Blaydes actually started that fight really well, though. And where we thought Curtis Blaydes would be weak in regards to the striking versus the striking of Tom Aspinall, not that Blaydes is a bad striker, because he's not. It's just against Tom Aspinall, that's where Blaydes shouldn't be the strongest inside the cage. Blaydes was actually standing and trading and striking with Tom Aspinall. And again, from the brief moments of exchanges, Curtis Blaydes was actually looking okay, better than I expected and better than a lot of people expected. But again, it's tough to say that Curtis Blaydes is the better striker because, the fight didn't go on long enough. It's not as if we saw 2 or 3 rounds of Curtis Blaydes exchanging with Tom Aspinall and beating him from a striking perspective. We just saw a glimpse of that, and things can change in fights. It might have just been a case of Tom Aspinall is just getting his reads in, and Curtis Blaydes was taking advantage of a little bit of inactivity whilst Aspinall's making his reads, and then Aspinall would have come on stronger. We just don't know. What we do know is that Curtis Blaydes is going to be the better wrestler here. And still, in my opinion, what we do know, or at least what I think I know, is that Tom Aspinall is going to be the better striker. So, look, Aspinall's got power. He also has been hit by Sergey Pavlovich, which is one of the hardest hitters. Like I said in that fight, the first person to land clean with a clean flush punch is going to be the fighter that wins. And actually, Tom Aspinall took a clean punch from Pavlovich, which I was actually very surprised about. And then Tom Aspinall finished him after with a big shot from himself. And yeah, look, I think it's quite a binary fight in regards to Aspinall. If he keeps this fight standing, he's going to knock Curtis Blaydes out. Curtis Blaydes has been knocked out a few times now. What was once an absolutely rock-solid chin for a heavyweight fighter, not so much anymore. And I think that, yeah, look, if this fight stays striking, Tom Aspinall's going to get his shots off. He's going to knock Blaydes out. Blaydes has got to be smart with the wrestling, and that's where I've got a little bit of hesitancy with Curtis Blaydes, because there's been plenty of fights where you've analysed it and you've said, look, Blaydes needs to wrestle. But then Blaydes likes to strike. He seems to fall in love with striking inside the fights, and then suddenly the wrestling opportunities aren't going to be coming as strong because he's now a little bit tired. He's been hit a little bit as well, and he's probably now a little bit hesitant, thinking, right, I've got to get takedowns, doesn't want to get too desperate, so then stays striking. And there's so many different ways you can potentially come to a conclusion of an outcome of a fight and why he hasn't wrestled. But the bottom line is that there's been a lot of fights where Blaydes needs to wrestle and he hasn't. But still, you can't rule it out, because Blaydes was once one of those fighters where in interviews he was saying, I'm going to wrestle my opponent. He knows I'm going to wrestle. I know I'm going to wrestle. Try and stop me. He had that type of attitude, and I want to see that Blaydes back. Now, in regards to how the fight plays out, I think if Blaydes does wrestle, then he's going to give himself a good chance of winning this fight. Now, how does Tom Aspinall defend a relentless wrestling attack? Because if this is the Curtis Blaydes that can shoot 20 plus takedowns in a 5-round fight, then we don't know how Tom Aspinall's going to react to that. What we do know is that Blaydes has got to find the good entries, and Tom Aspinall's a good striker. So, look, I kind of don't like the betting line, unless you're wanting to drop Tom Aspinall in a long shot parlay where, you're just playing for a little bit of fun. That's fair enough. But from a long-term perspective and actually calculating implied probability and how likely it is for Aspinall to win the fight compared to what the betting line is, which I think is around minus 350, I really don't like the betting line for Tom Aspinall. I think that Curtis Blaydes is better than what the betting line suggests. I think he's more live to win this fight than what the betting line suggests. It's just I do think Tom Aspinall's going to knock him out early. However, if Aspinall doesn't knock him out early, that means Blaydes is doing something as well, because I don't see this being a whitewash, one-sided 5-round fight. So if Aspinall doesn't get that early KO, Blaydes is in this fight. Blaydes is competitive in this fight. And if Blaydes is in and if he's competitive, that means he's wrestling. That's when it starts getting a little bit dicey. So I actually think if this does start getting into late second round, third round, fourth round, maybe a fifth round, then it's going to be a very close and competitive fight. And it could be one of them that if it went to a decision, that it could go either way. But I'm still thinking that Tom Aspinall knocks Curtis Blaydes out early in this fight at a relatively large clip. I think Blaydes will open up with striking, just as he always does. And that's where I think that Aspinall's going to catch him at some point, or at least hurt him enough where Blaydes is shooting these reckless, or not reckless, but desperate takedowns that Aspinall's seeing coming from a mile off, and then they're standing back up and Blaydes is still not fully recovered, and then Aspinall finishes him after that. I'm seeing that type of fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tom Aspinall to win this fight and still the interim UFC heavyweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got Bobby Green versus Paddy Pimblett, or I think we've got to call him King Green. There's been some weird name change. I'm not sure exactly what exactly has gone down, but on UFC stats and on the UFC website is under King Green. I'll stick with Bobby Green for the sake of this podcast until, we understand exactly what's happened there. But look, it's a really interesting fight, and I think it initially when the betting lines were released and Bobby Green was a favourite, I think that's what people kind of expected. And Bobby Green is a veteran and he's an exciting fighter, hands down type of fighter, really good everywhere, striking, wrestling, grappling. And I think that it was just a general consensus, or at least it was a general consensus, that Paddy Pimblett is finally meeting his match. He's finally got that step up in competition where he's going to fall at this hurdle. And look, for me personally, I've always liked Paddy Pimblett as a person. I think as a fighter, he brings something different. I always like variety and different. I was just personally always waiting for that big step up in competition where Paddy Pimblett's a massive favourite and you can get the underdog at a good price and, cash on the underdog. I've been waiting for that moment with Pimblett. I thought I had it and should have had it against Jared Gordon. I bet Jared Gordon at plus 200, I think. He should have won that fight, in my opinion. But the thing is, even though Pimblett lost that fight, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, he has still got a little bit better, and he's still getting better every time we see him. And the thing is with Bobby Green, when you actually dig into Bobby Green's record, he's been fighting the UFC for 15 years, and you can make the argument that he only loses against the best fighters in the division, which is true, but you look at the fighters that he's beaten. So apart from Grant Dawson, because that was a good win, you can't take that away from Bobby Green. Good win, good knockout early in that fight as well. I do think if that fight had played out, he would have lost. But I actually bet Bobby Green as well at plus 300, I think, in that fight, which I was buzzing about cashing that plus 300 ticket. But I was under no illusions that Bobby Green should be losing that fight. It's just I didn't think he should be plus 300. That's the reason why I bet him. But aside from Grant Dawson, which I think that Bobby Green loses that fight way more times than he wins it, if they fought 10 times, the best win, in my opinion, that Bobby Green's had in the UFC over the 15 years is Nasrat Haqparast. And look, Haqparast is an okay fighter, he's serviceable, but he's not exactly super high level. So yeah, Green's only losing against the top level guys, but he's also not really beating any top level guys either. So I just don't think that Bobby Green is this huge step up in competition that maybe some people are portraying for Paddy Pimblett. I like Paddy in this fight. I think that, look, he's going to get out-volumed if this is a striking fight and he doesn't try and put his stamp on the striking exchanges. I think Green will get up on the numbers. But Pimblett isn't a bad striker himself. He's got weird deceptive power. He's big for the division. And he's got this real good MMA cage wrestling stalling style where he'll shoot a takedown, maybe not complete it, but then he'll drive the opponent's back against the cage. Then he might not even complete the takedown. It might be like a half takedown where the opponent his back is against the cage, but they've got a knee down and they're sort of half down but not fully down. But Paddy Pimblett does a really good job of then, securing a hook, sinking a hook in against the cage and just being able to run the clock down and half threaten with chokes against the cage as well, and maybe try and pull their opponent back on the mat, try and take the back. He's a real tricky grappler, and he's got real good cage wrestling and cage grappling. And regardless of what you think of Paddy Pimblett, he's a high-level jiu-jitsu player. Like, he really is. Like, you talk to people around the UK, people that I respect, that know Paddy better than what I know Paddy, and have seen him grapple on the circuit and all this sort of stuff. There's people that speak very, very highly of Paddy Pimblett's grappling, like it's supposed to be very, very good. And I just think that Paddy Pimblett's live in this fight. You know that he's going to have the home crowd behind him. That's going to boost him. Even if this fight goes to a decision, he's got some favourability with the judges because he somehow pulled that out in Vegas against Jared Gordon in Gordon's home country. So there's that sketchy side to it. But from a stylistic perspective, I think that Paddy's got decent enough striking. Bobby Green's been hurt a couple of times in his last few fights. Pimblett's got that deceptive power. He's got that decent cage wrestling, cage grappling. I just think that it's not going to be a clear-cut fight for Bobby Green. I think it's going to be grindy, gritty. I think it's going to be ugly at times as well. And for me, that kind of favours Paddy Pimblett's style. So for those reasons, I'm picking Paddy Pimblett to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Christian Leroy Duncan versus Gregory Robocop Rodrigues. Now, I'm a big fan of Gregory Robocop Rodrigues. I've actually cashed him quite a few times. I've also lost bets against him as well, betting against him, and then he wins. But that just proves that he's a very, very good fighter, and he's super well-rounded, and he's got some real good skills and some good power for this division. Christian Leroy Duncan, I was a little unsure of him in Cage Warriors, but he did start to win me over in regards to his skill set, his ability, and specifically his athleticism as well. Then I bet him in his UFC debut against Armand Petrosian. Petrosian absolutely smoked him, so that was a bad bet. But it was from then that I was a little bit now sceptical on Christian Leroy Duncan. I just didn't like what I saw in that Petrosian fight. And look, he's had a couple of wins since then. I don't think he's fought anybody at that level of Rodrigues or a Petrosian again. So now he's gone back. Well, he went back down in competition after the Petrosian lost. Won the fights that he was supposed to win. Now he's back up in competition against Gregory Rodrigues. Now, Gregory Rodrigues, I love his offensive striking, hate his defensive striking. He's super hittable, but he's super powerful and really fast from the offensive perspective. So he's very Marmite. Like, you're either going to love him because of that or you're going to hate him because of that. I'm kind of in the middle with it. Like I say, I love the offensive game. Hate his defensive striking. The defensive striking is going to give Leroy Duncan opportunities to land hard punches. Rodrigues' chin, I think it's hit and miss. Like, I see him eating some real big shots, which is great, but then I've seen him knocked out badly as well. So yeah, like, again, there's a lot of hit and miss here, especially when it comes to the striking. Where it then starts changing, though, is with the wrestling and grappling. Like, Rodrigues is a Brazilian wrestling champion, I believe. He's also a very, very high-level BJJ black belt. Christian Leroy Duncan, he was taken down by Petrosian. He was controlled. I do think that there's an element of this fight where I really do not trust Christian Leroy Duncan, if he's put on his back, of being able to get back up to his feet, just because Rodrigues is so good in a top position. He's so heavy, he can land ground and pound. If you make a mistake, he's going to submit you, or at least threaten with the submissions to put you back down on your back. So I think that the striking here is really hit and miss. I could see Leroy Duncan knocking Rodrigues out. On the flip side, I could see Rodrigues knocking Leroy Duncan out as well. Like, it's that type of fight. But what separates these two fighters and the biggest gap in skill is that wrestling and grappling edge for Rodrigues. I think that's a pretty big edge. So when it comes to making a pick and prediction, we're seeing a fight that is very volatile on the feet, and either fighter could knock each other out. But then you've got Rodrigues with this extra strategy, a potential extra path to victory, and a big gap in skill. And that's where I have to lean. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gregory Rodrigues to win this fight. So in the next fight, this is a really good fight actually. We've got Arnold Allen versus Giga Chikadze. So look, Giga Chikadze is a fighter that I like. I've cashed on him. Again, I've lost a couple of bets on him as well. To be fair, it was Jamal Emmers where I thought Emmers actually beat him. But look, Giga Chikadze is a very high-level kickboxer. He's got the Giga kick, which is a spin back kick, I believe, to the body. You know, he's a very, very dangerous kicker. Arnold Allen on the other side is a striker predominantly himself, although I do think he's the more well-rounded fighter here with the wrestling and grappling. But like I say, predominantly he's a striker himself, but he's more boxing heavy, whereas Giga Chikadze, of course, he's got hands, but he's more predominantly kickboxing. So you've got that on the feet striking, you've got that boxing versus the kickboxer, and I just feel that we've seen this before. Like Giga Chikadze when he fought Calvin Kattar. So Calvin Kattar, very boxing heavy striker as well, and I actually really liked Giga Chikadze to beat Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar was just coming off that horrific beating from Max Holloway, which I still think is probably the single best performance I've ever seen from a fighter in mixed martial arts, in Max Holloway, of course. So Kattar's come from that absolute beating that he took against Holloway, against Giga Chikadze. First fight, I think it was like the first card of the year in January, so after the Christmas break and all that, and I thought, you know what, this is a good spot for Giga Chikadze. Calvin Kattar came into that fight and absolutely smashed Giga Chikadze, beat the brakes off him, and I think that Giga Chikadze has got one of these kickboxing styles where he struggles against a pressure boxer, and Arnold Allen can have that style. He will pressure forwards, he's big, he believes in himself, he's durable, he knows he's got power, and he knows he's got really fast hands, and I think this is a stylistic nightmare for Chikadze if it plays out in the way that I think it's going to play out, unless the Calvin Kattar fight was an anomaly. But I don't think anomalies happen in that fashion where the beating was that bad. An anomaly might be, look, Giga Chikadze wasn't totally on it that night and the boxing kind of got to him a little bit. But Calvin Kattar really put it on Giga Chikadze, and Arnold Allen can replicate that because he's got a similar sort of style to what Calvin Kattar had, except I think Arnold Allen's actually better. So I think it's a real tough fight for Chikadze. I think he's going to have moments early in this fight, but once Arnold Allen gets into a flow here, I think he's just going to really put hands on Chikadze. Hard combinations, fast combinations. He's not going to give Chikadze room to breathe and set up these powerful leg attacks, and that's the difference maker for me. So for those reasons, I'm picking Arnold Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the flyweight division, and for me, this is one of the best fights on the entire card. We've got Mokaev versus Manel Kape. Now, there's a lot of rumours going around that this fight's been cancelled. I think there's accounts on X, obviously formerly Twitter, that are making, false reports that the fight's off. I believe that the fight is on. I think the only reason why there was a little bit of a scare was on Saturday when the broadcast on UFC revealed the main card and Mokaev was on there with Kape, but then it's been downgraded to the prelims. And at the time, people were thinking, oh my God, is the fight off? Because we can't see the fight on the main card, which we thought it was on there. So I think that's where it's all stemmed from. I'm actually still a little bit reserved that the fight's going to happen until they're actually sort of weighed in and in the cage. That's when I'll really start to get more excited about it. But yeah, that's just based on Kape just being involved in so many fights that have been cancelled. I think since he signed for the UFC, there's like 9 cancelled fights on his Topology account, which you can't actually blame Kape for. Even most of them, like most of them are his opponents, either cancelling, pulling out, botching weight cuts. However, the last 2 have been his fault. Withdrew on the last one, botched a weight cut the fight before. So yeah, there's just that aura around this fight where I think that once they both weigh in and the fight, they've squared off and, there's no medical issues, I think at that point we can be excited. But look, it's a really good fight. It's a fight that needs to happen for Mokaev in regards to leveling up in competition. Because look, Mokaev, since he came to the UFC, it's been the same thing said by everybody. Oh, he needs to fight somebody. He needs to fight somebody. He's not fought anybody. Well, actually, when you look at Mokaev's UFC opponents, and he's not lost in the UFC. He's fought against Cody Durden, who is a tough, really good fighter, super skilled in multiple areas. Remember, he finished Cody Durden early in round 1 as well, and that was his UFC debut. Then in the next fight, he fights Charles Johnson, which at the time, Charles Johnson was new to the UFC, but we now know that Johnson's a really stoic dude, really well-rounded, has got some really good wins in the UFC as well. So again, beats him in a decision. Then the two that are a little bit lower level are Malcolm Gordon, Jafel Filio, but then he fights Tim Elliott, who's fought for a UFC championship before. Then he fought Alex Perez, who's fought for a UFC championship before. Now, I'm not still 100% convinced that Mokaev won that fight against Perez, but it was a unanimous win. Perez is also a very high-level wrestler. He's got a legit wrestling background. He's never been taken down more than 2 times in a single fight in the UFC. Muhammad Mokaev got him down 3 times. But I like how relentless Mokaev was in that fight, and he eventually got the better of a very, very good wrestler. And this is where I think it's key in this fight, because Kape's got good striking. His defensive wrestling was a problem outside the UFC. That's something that has been improved throughout his UFC career. Same as his defensive grappling as well, being able to, scramble and get back up to his feet. That's definitely improved since he's been in the UFC. But I just don't think that it's at a level where he's going to be able to stop Mokaev for a full 3 rounds. Mokaev is going to score takedowns in this fight. I think he is going to do a good job with some topside grappling as well. It's just, does Kape catch Mokaev with like a flying knee on an entry into a takedown, or catch him with an uppercut, or just knocks him clean out early in the fight? Like, don't get me wrong, Kape's live in this fight and he's got power, so he's got that equalizer for sure. But it just seems that the ways that Kape is going to win this fight come from low percentage probability strikes. So low percentage outcomes, finding that one punch that just lands clean and knocks Mokaev out, or times a flying knee on a double leg entry, stuff that isn't going to happen too many times if they run this fight 10 times. I think that Mokaev's going to look relatively dominant in this fight. I think he's going to get the takedowns he needs. If he's taking down and doing good work or okay work in the grappling against somebody like Alex Perez, Manel Kape is not as good as Alex Perez offensive or defensive wrestling. He's not as good as Alex Perez offensive or defensive grappling. So if Mokaev's having success there against Perez, I feel he's going to have success here against Kape. It's just the difference between Kape and Perez is Kape's got the danger upside on the feet. So maybe Mokaev just has to be a little bit more reserved, a little bit more calculated in how he approaches the takedowns and approaches his game plan. But make no mistake about it, like, Alex Perez has still got good striking himself. He's still got power himself. So, yeah, I think that Mokaev's proved himself to be in the top of the division. And I think he's got a style that some fighters are going to really struggle against. And if you've got that wrestling and grappling background of Alex Perez that's struggling against the wrestling and grappling of Mokaev, then I think Kape's going to have more of an issue there, just because I don't think Kape's as good defensively as what Alex Perez is. So yeah, look, over 5 rounds, might lean a little bit more towards Kape, but over 3 rounds, I think Mokaev has got the goods here and does the job. So for those reasons, I'm picking Muhammad Mokaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nathaniel Wood versus Daniel Pineda. Now, Daniel Pineda is actually not an easy out for many fighters at all. Like, he's rugged, he's tough, he's dirty, gritty, he's well-rounded as well. So his boxing's decent, he's got decent power, he's got wrestling, he's got a bit of grappling. So he's got a little bit of everything, but so is Nathaniel Wood. And I think that when I look at how Pineda wins this fight, outside of just landing one big punch that knocks Nathaniel Wood out, I'm really struggling to see Nathaniel Wood really getting outworked in this fight. Now, another area where Pineda might have success, but it's also an aspect of MMA that, I've said it before, I think is one of the most difficult things to analyse pre-fight, almost impossible in some cases, is the physicality and who's going to be stronger. I've got a feeling Pineda might be the more physical, more stronger fighter. So if you can pin Nathaniel Wood up against the cage and keep him there for, long periods and drag the fight out, run the clock down, maybe that's a possibility for Pineda, but that's if he is the stronger fighter. It's a really, really hard attribute to predict who's going to have the advantage there. So look, outside of that, I think Wood's the better technical striker. I think he mixes things up a little bit better. I think he's absolutely faster in regards to his striking movement as well. I think he lands hard when he hits. So if Nathaniel Wood is landing a ton of volume, maybe doubling up on strikes and landing hard punches in between that as well. I think that it's going to cause Pineda problems. I think that Wood's got a decent wrestling and grappling game as well. He got caught out against Naimov last time out, but look, again, Naimov was really physical. He was also fouling a lot as well, which may have played a factor into Wood really not being able to get going as much as what he'd have liked to. But I think that Wood, again, his wrestling, his grappling is going to be good enough to, at the very, very least, just mix things up. So maybe he blitzes on the feet and then hits a takedown, but Pineda gets back up to his feet, and now Pineda's thinking, well, shit, I can't really get anything going off on the feet. And then when I'm looking to try and feed my way in on the feet, it's just taking me down. And I think Wood's entire MMA game coming into play here, mixing things up, breaking the flow of things in regards to shooting some takedowns, maybe getting a little bit of top control time. I think that Wood's got a bounce back fight here that is not an easy fight, but it's a fight where it's going to bring the best out of him. He's going to perform really well, and he'll put himself right back in the map, in the mix in the division, and then, you know, full steam ahead, he'll be able to move forward, put a couple of wins together after that. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nathaniel Wood to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Molly McCann versus Bruna, Brasil. So I really don't know what to expect with this fight. I'm going to be honest, like, Molly McCann, I think that where she's going to flourish in this fight is with aggression, forward pressure, because the one thing that I have seen from Bruna Brasil that she doesn't like too much is when her opponent is aggressive, in her face, pushing forwards, landing a barrage of attacks, you know, combinations, strikes, punches. And I think with the crowd behind Molly McCann, I think that she's I mean, her style is very forward pressure and get in your face, and if I have to eat 2 punches to land 3 of my own, then that's fine. You know, that's kind of a style anyway, but with the home crowd behind her here, I think that it's going to elevate that a little bit. So that's where I'm favouring Molly McCann winning. But the thing is with Bruna Brasil, she's actually not a bad fighter. I think she's been given a bad rap in the UFC because she came in with a lot of hype and then lost that first fight and let a load of people down, and then everybody just turns on you completely like a full 180. So I think that's why people aren't really respecting Bruna Brasil as much, and because of that, you're getting Bruna Brasil at actually a really good price at the bookies as well. Like, I'm pretty sure she's like plus 200 or something, which in my opinion is way too wide. But at the same time, I do see stylistic advantages for Molly McCann with that forward pressure and aggression. The other thing to take into consideration here, and I actually didn't know this until I saw the corner, but that's because they've become so predominant over the last few months, is that Bruna Brasil trains out of Fighting Nerds in Brazil. So again, it's this, I'm telling you, I've said it so many times over the last few months, that gym is on absolute fire at the minute. Like, everybody's coming out super hot, everybody's in form. The more wins that they're accumulating, the stronger the team will get, and the belief and the morale and everything inside that camp, honestly, like, it's real. And I do think that there has to be something to be said when it comes to analysing fighters that are training out of that gym. So Bruna Brasil, regardless of, you know, how she's feeling from an individual on form, the gym itself, the vibe that she'll be getting, and the lads that she's been working around, like Gian Silva and Caio Barralho, you know, all these fighters from the gym that's just absolutely red hot right now, it's going to feed into her. So this is what I mean. I'm a little bit like, look, I expect Molly McCann to come forwards and land strikes and do well, and the crowd will be behind her and the judges will be behind her. So I do have to pick Molly McCann to win this fight, but like, don't be surprised if Bruna Brasil, you know, fires up and upset here, because I won't be. But from a pick and prediction perspective, I am going to be picking Molly McCann to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Caolan Loughran versus Jake Hadley. This fight is absolute savage matchmaking, and Jake Hadley, credit to him, stepped up on short notice. So Caolan Loughran was supposed to fight Raymond Tavares, and that would have been a really good fight as well, like a brutal striking fight between two fighters that will just go at it. And unfortunately, Tavares pulled out, and the UFC needed a fighter to step in, and steps in. Jake Hadley does. Comes up in weight as well to bantamweight. So, like I say, so much respect for Jake Hadley, but it actually makes this fight so much better as well. Like, Yeah, it's such a good fight. Now, how they match up, it's a strange one with Loughran because Loughran's a fighter that I did see pre-UFC, and I kind of still see it now, I'm not going to lie. I still see UFC champion qualities inside of his, not just his skill set and his game, but in his mindset as well. Like, this is a guy that you will absolutely not break at all. You'll not make him quit. You'll not get into his head pre-fight. And if you try, it'll probably just make him stronger in the fight. Like, this guy's mindset, I think, is absolutely bulletproof, which every single UFC champion that's ever lived will have that type of mindset. But then he's got this striking game where he'll bang, and then he's got a good MMA wrestling game, and then he's got a good submission game. So it's kind of the full package. What makes me pause a little bit, and I genuinely think he's going to get caught at some point with this, is that his defensive striking needs work. Like, his head movement is kind of on the centre line. He eats more punches than he should, which is fine. He's tough, he's durable, and he's not exactly getting rocked or knocked out either. However, there is going to come a point where he fights somebody that is very heavy-handed or can sneakily set head kicks up, that he's going to run into problems. He's going to run into a literal brick that is going to land on him and is going to knock him out unless he fixes this aspect of his game. Now, I don't think that Jake Hadley is that. So I don't think Hadley's going to put hands on Loughran and he's going to be the power puncher that knocks him out. But what makes this fight interesting is the wrestling and the grappling. I think that Loughran by far is the better wrestler, but I think Hadley is going to be the better grappler. And I do think the fight's going to be won and lost in the wrestling and grappling. Like, I do think there's going to be plenty of striking, but both fighters will want to get the fight down to the mat because they'll both feel that they're better than their opponent. Now, what I think is going to happen is I think that Loughran's going to be shooting the takedowns. I think he's going to be able to drive Hadley up against the cage, take him down. But I think Hadley's going to get the better of the scrambles. And even if Hadley's put on his back, Hadley's got a real crafty way of just finding escapes and exits and being able to take the back of his opponent. Now, although Hadley's the fighter stepping up in weight, Hadley's going to be taller and longer. So I'm kind of seeing a scenario where Loughran's hitting takedowns, but Hadley's getting the better in the scrambles, getting the advantageous position on top, or maybe even taking Loughran's back, locking up a body triangle and keeping Loughran just stuck a little bit and then looking for rear naked chokes. That's the kind of fight I'm kind of leaning with here in regards to how I think it plays out. On the feet, I think Loughran's going to land hard shots. He's going to hit Jake Hadley hard. I think Jake Hadley's going to land shots on Loughran. He's going to land clean as well. That's going to force the wrestling and grappling scenarios. And I just think Hadley's the better grappler. Like, even if he's put on his back, I trust Hadley in regards to maybe being able to get back up to a knee and potentially reversing a position. Maybe Loughran's just super strong and doesn't allow that to happen as well. It's a close fight is what I think I'm getting at. I'm sure you can guess that from the tone of my voice as well. But when I think that the fight's going to play out on the ground and be won by who's the better grappler, I think Jake Hadley's the better grappler. So although big ask for him, stepping in on short notice, stepping up in weight, I actually think that Hadley's going to be really big inside. Like, Hadley's not a small flyweight. Hadley's a huge flyweight. And at bantamweight, I think he's going to look really big as well. So I don't think that the physicality issue is going to be an issue. I like Hadley from a grappling perspective where I think the fight's going to be determined. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jake Hadley to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mick Parkin versus Lukasz Brzeski. So Mick Parkin, I cashed Mick Parkin as an underdog on his UFC debut. I thought that was a perfect fight against Pogues, and he proved it was. Pogues just not a UFC caliber fighter, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's one of those things. Some fighters are and some fighters aren't. Only a small percentage of fighters are, so it's not as if you're sort of left out if you're not a UFC caliber MMA fighter as an MMA fighter, because again, only a small percentage of fighters make it. Only a smaller percentage of fighters stay around for long enough. So it's not a disrespect comment. I just don't think that Pogues is at that level of the UFC. So Mick Parkin did what he needed to do. And since then, I just don't think Parkin's looked that great. Against Kyle Mercado, I don't think that, there was moments where he was looking okay, but there was also sloppy moments as well where Mercado was doing good work. And then last time out against Muhammad Usman, I bet Usman as an underdog against Mick Parkin in that fight. it was such a razor close decision to the point where I actually think that the little stumble from Mick Parkin's low kick on Usman in that third round was the only significant thing where the judges could separate them, and that's what caused Mick Parkin to end up winning that decision. But outside of that low kick, like, super close. And we've seen on the weekend, like, I'm not a massive fan of Thomas Peterson either in regards to being a UFC caliber fighter. Maybe he proves me wrong and sticks around. He's got a wrestling game, so that can always be a good base to keep yourself in the UFC. But I'm just not super impressed with what Muhammad Usman did against a fighter like Peterson. And then it makes you wonder, well, is Mick Parkin in and around that level as well? So yeah, I'm not massively high on Mick Parkin. My mind is always open to change and fighters can develop, and I'm aware of that. But Lukasz Brzeski is a fighter that, again, he's not super exciting in my opinion. He's not like one of these stoic fighters that's going to end up having a skill set to get him up into the top of the division, but he's serviceable. He does a decent job. He lands a ton of volume, and he's moves well for a heavyweight as well. And he's also been in there with some really good heavyweights. So yeah, look, I think it's going to be one of these close competitive fights that's back and forth, a little bit of striking, a little bit of wrestling, grappling. Maybe Parkin's got the wrestling and grappling edge here, but is it so much of an edge where he takes Brzeski down at will, or takes him down and Brzeski can't stand back up to his feet? I just don't think so. I think the fight's going to be determined from the striking perspective, and I just see a very close back and forth striking affair where both fighters are having certain moments in certain rounds, and if there's not a knockout, we get to a decision and we've got no idea who's going to have won the fight, or at least we think the fight could potentially go either way. Yeah, I think it's a tough fight in regards to being super confident in. I'm going to side with the underdog for that reason. I'm picking Lukasz Brzeski to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Oban Elliott versus Preston Parsons. Now, Oban Elliott's a fighter that I really want to see more of before I really come down with a solid opinion of him as a fighter, because look, he's super entertaining, he's explosive, he comes out 100 mile an hour like a bull, will throw hard, powerful strikes, has got a wrestling and grappling game as well, again, when he's being offensive and aggressive with the forward pressure. But the problem with Oban Elliott is because of that type of style, he leaves so many openings as well, not just from a striking defensive perspective where he can be cracked himself, but also from being overly aggressive and leaving his hips open for an opponent to shoot in on him and take him down. And when he's on his back, he's got a decent grappling game, but I just don't see him being super effective against somebody who is very good on top. And this is where Preston Parsons comes in, because Parsons' striking is okay. He's powerful, he's got some combinations, and it's definitely not to be sniffed at. I don't think he's as wild and aggressive and as fast as Oban Elliott starts, but Parsons can definitely hang on the feet. But Parsons has got a real good wrestling and grappling game at this level in the UFC. So I say this level because if you're looking at his wrestling and grappling game working against a top 15 fighter, it changes quite a lot when you're looking at that quality of fighter. But Oban Elliott's not there. And I think, like I said, at this level, Parsons is a very dirty, ugly, gritty type of fighter where he can drag you down and smother you on top, and his jiu-jitsu's good. And I kind of think that Oban Elliott's going to come out fast, hard here. Parsons just going to be able to either weather a storm or maybe level change under a strike, under a wild punch from Elliott, get Elliott down, or maybe Elliott throws a flying knee and it half connects, but Parsons uses that to catch it and take him down. And then once Parsons is on top of Elliott, I think we're going to see a big difference here. I think Elliott could potentially escape maybe once or twice early, but Parsons has got that ability where he can keep going back to the well, grind on his opponents, and once the takedowns start being 2, 3, 4, I think that Preston starts to look more and more comfortable, more and more dominant. And yeah, look, Oban Elliott flash sparking Preston Parsons early in this fight wouldn't be surprising. But I just think Parsons is the better quality fighter at this point in his UFC career, fought better level of competition, had more fights at the top level in the UFC as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Preston Parsons to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sean O'Bannon versus Alice Ardelean. And again, at the risk of maybe some people accusing me of being disrespectful, which I never actually am, I'm not a disrespectful type of person, but from a UFC caliber perspective, this is a very low-level fight. Sean O'Bannon, I don't think, set the world on fire at all in the UFC so far. I think that she's got some skills that she'll be able to develop on, and maybe she looks good in some certain fights, and I think this might be one of those fights, if I'm being totally honest. Alice Ardelean, the UFC have brought her in. This is again a short notice fight for Ardelean. Bannon's opponent pulled out, so Ardelean stepped in. And look, Ardelean's record, I think it's like 9-5. She's lost against the likes of Weili Zhang and Diana Belbita, which are UFC level opponents, but some of the fighters that she's beaten as well, she's beating fighters with negative records, in and around the European scene on promotions that, aren't really putting together like well-matched quality fights. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a real shock to the system for Ardelean stepping into the UFC. But on the same token, like on the flip side to this, it's not as if she's fighting like a super high-level UFC fighter who's on an absolute crazy and solid win streak. So I just feel it's going to be a low-level fight, maybe a bit back and forth in moments, but the short notice aspect of Ardelean and the fact that she's never beaten anybody at the level of Shauna Bannon, I just think those issues are going to be issues for Ardelean. I don't get the signing really. I would have thought that there was better options for the UFC to bring in, and again, I don't mean that disrespectfully. Maybe there is a good fighter in Ardelean, and she's only beaten what's put in front of her. But even if that's an 0-2 fighter, but again, it's just not a great look. She's also 32 years old, so it's not as if she's a young fighter that's being sort of developed in a certain way, fighting lower level competition to build a confidence and build a skill set. Like, she's either in a prime now or just past it. So yeah, I think it's really tough for me to sit here and say, yeah, I'm going to pick Alice Ardelean to win the fight, because like I say, it's short notice debut against a fighter of a quality that she's never beaten before. And yeah, it's like I say, I'm at the risk of repeating myself constantly. It's hard to look past Shauna Bannon in this fight. So for those reasons, I am picking Shauna Bannon to win this fight. And we make our way to the final breakdown of the podcast, and we've got Modestas Bukauskas versus Marcin Prachnio. Now, it's really tough with Marcin Prachnio to be super confident of picking him to win a fight or lose a fight, because you just do not know which version of Prachnio is going to turn up. Like, there's a version of Prachnio that's an absolute beast, but there's a version of Prachnio that's just, relatively comfortable to sort of run through him and look good against him, and there just doesn't seem to be an in-between. He's either, putting together a win streak and you're thinking, okay, Prachnio's actually got some real ability, real durability, real power, real skill set, and then you expect him to win the next fight against maybe a similar level of opponent that he's just absolutely crushed and ran through, but then he doesn't, and he sort of falls flat and lets you down a little bit. So it's tough to know which Prachnio you're going to get. Now, the thing is with Bukauskas, you kind of know what you're going to get. Like, he's a good fighter, he's good everywhere. He very rarely overperforms, but very rarely underperforms either. Like, he's just a straight bullet. You know what you're going to get from Bukauskas. And I like that about him. I really do. I think there's a quality fighter in Bukauskas. I think he was unfairly removed from the UFC last time out, and it was only a matter of time before he was back. He's been in there with some real high-level guys, but so has Marcin Prachnio. But Bukauskas, I think, has been more competitive with these higher-level guys than Prachnio has. And yeah, like I say, just the fact that there's an uncertainty of Prachnio, like, he could just fall flat at any moment, or not at any moment, but in any fight. I do trust Bukauskas more. I think Bukauskas has got good striking, wrestling and grappling, so even if Prachnio does pull out one of his good performances, I still think Bukauskas is going to be solid in every single area, both offensively and defensively, at this level in the UFC, enough to maybe stop Prachnio having that super high-level performance that he sometimes comes out with. And like I say, on the flip side to that, if he has a soft performance, then Bukauskas will run through him. So, yeah, again, it's hard for me to sit here and say, yeah, I like Prachnio to win this fight, just because I don't know what version I'm going to get. I do know what I'm going to get from Bukauskas, and at the very least, even the best version of Prachnio, I think Bukauskas will be more than competitive. But then, like I say, you've got the potential of not having that super on-form Prachnio, where Bukauskas will look dominant. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Modestas Bukauskas to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I know I said in the introduction that I wasn't feeling too great and it was only going to be like half an hour long, but there was 14 fights and some of these fights are really, really good as well. So I've naturally just overextended on the breakdowns and the analysis to talk more about each fight. And I'm sure you can get from my tone that I am super excited about this card. I think it's a real good card. I think there's some real good fights on it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out on Saturday night. As for the podcast itself, as always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you are listening on one of our podcast platforms, please don't forget you can come over to YouTube where you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can also drop a comment in there as well. Tell me who you're picking, tell me where you disagree with me, tell me who you're betting on as well, and we can have those conversations. It is myself that replies to the comment section, so although I am busy throughout every fight week, genuinely, I do try my best to come back and reply to those comments. So again, thank you very much. One last thing, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com, where we've got plenty for absolutely everybody, no matter what type of gambler you are. If you like AI, we've got something for you. If you like fun long shot parlays, we've got something for you. If you just want to follow what I'm betting on, we've got that. And if you just want the written breakdowns to try and help your own analysis with our recommended bets, we've got that as well. And it's all in one subscription. All super affordable as well. That's MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.